Hello, good day to you all. And today we'll be discussing a postgraduate module on electroencephalography (EEG). So, as the name goes, encephalon is the Latin root for brain. Graphy is writing, graphical, and electro is electrical. So, electroencephalography literally means a written record of the electrical activity of the brain. So, if we see brain electrical activity, now it's not just brain electrical activity. The electrical activity can be studied of different tissues. So if we see the different biorhythms available, there's ECG, electrocardiography, there's EMG, electromyography, there's EOG, electrooculography, and then obviously there's EEG, electroencephalography. So if we see electrical activity, so electrical activity represents a ongoing phenomenon present in different tissues of our body through which they are interlinked with each other. So if we see the heart, the different myocytes in the heart are interlinked with each other through action potentials, which is a propagated electrical activity. Similarly, if we see a brain is said to be composed of multiple neurons, and these neurons are organized together to form different neural networks, and the interplay of these different neurons and this neural networks leads to basically what is brain function. So if you see brain electrical activity, the brain electrical activity can be studied at different scales. So you can study the whole brain electrical activity, which is basically what we do in EEG. You can also do a localized studies through the place of electrodes within the brain. This is something called intracranial EEG or electrocorticography, or there is something called local field potentials, in which the brain tissue is penetrated with small micro electrodes, and you can study the electrical activity in the vicinity of the neurons. And then you can also study electrical activity at the level of the cells itself. So this is basically the neuronal studies, in which we study various postsynaptic potentials and action potentials of the neurons. And then we can also isolate ion channels through various techniques and study the firing and opening and closing of different ion channels. So coming down to EEGs, so EEG is recorded usually from the scalp. So basically the electrical activity at the level of the scalp is due to an electric field, and this electric field is produced as a consequence of the electrical activity of the large population of brain neurons and the neural networks which are present in the brain. So EEG is primarily used as a diagnostic modality in disciplines like neurology, neurosurgery, but it can also be used as an adjunct research tool in cognitive neurophysiology. So over the course of today's discussion and presentation, we will see what is the biophysical basis of the EEG, as in what are the biophysical phenomena in which an activity at the level of the neuron can be reflected at the level of the scalp. Then what are the various methods used for the recording of an EEG, and once EEG data is recorded, how would you go about interpreting it, how would you go about analyzing it. And then we will also briefly discuss how electroencephalography can be used in the clinical domain for diagnosis and risk evaluation in surgery. And similarly we can also see how ECG can be EEG, electroencephalography, is used in the research fields, especially in the fields of cognition. So to understand EEG, we need to understand biorhythms first. So a biorhythm, or what we call biopotentials, are electrical activities produced at the level of various tissues, which can be recorded remotely from the tissues too. So if we see ECG, for example, even though ECG is electrical activity produced at the heart, we can record ECG at a distant site. So ECG is usually recorded by placing limb electrodes and chest electrodes. Similarly, EMG is also recorded by placing electrodes on the skin, or it can also be done through needle electrodes, but EMG is also represented in the form of skin EMG, or what we call surface EMG. And similarly we can also use EEG to record electrical at the scalp remotely from the distance from the source that produces electrical activity. So first thing is we need to understand the physical and the biophysical mechanisms through which an electrical activity can be recorded remotely from the source of its production. So for this we need to talk about something called the dipole model. So if you see the dipole model has been proposed to explain EEG, EMG and ECG. So, if we understand the cellular basis of the electrical activity, so at the cellular level all electrical activity, be it an action potential or be it a membrane potential like a postsynaptic potential, which is basically a graded potential, each of these potentials are produced due to transmembrane ionic currents. So, basically what happens is there are specific ion channels present in the membrane of the cells, and these ion channels conduct transmembrane currents. So, sometimes currents can be from outside to inside. So, there can be flow of positive charges from outside to inside, which is basically like sodium entering the cell. Sometimes there can be flow of positive charges from inside to outside, which could be potassium leaving the cell. Sometimes chloride can also enter the cell, which is a negative charge entering the cell. So, usually in physics the convention is to represent the positive flow of current in the direction of flow of positive charges. So, for example, sodium entering the cell would be a positive current entering the cell, whereas potassium exiting the cell would be a positive current leaving the cell. Whereas if we see chloride entering a cell, chloride is actually a negative charge entering the cell, but in the terms of electrical currents, an entry of chloride can be represented as a positive current leaving the cell. So, now if we understand in the small micro domain of the membrane in which transmembrane ionic currents are taking place. So, whenever there is a transmembrane ionic current, positive charge flows from one place to another place. Now, the place from which positive charge flows into is what is called a source, and the place from which positive charge flows away can be described as a sink. So, at the level of every ion membrane channel, there is a source on one side of the membrane, and then there is a sink on the opposite side of the membrane. Now, once this ionic currents and ions enter the cell or enter the extracellular fluid, they are dispersed among the fluid, and as we know, all current has to flow in a loop. So, whatever enters the cell will also have to eventually leave the cell. So, this is due to axial conduction of these ions along the bulk space within the intracellular fluid or extracellular fluid, and eventually these ions which have entered the cell would eventually also leave the cell through leakage channels present. So, now what was initially a source sink configuration at the point of entry would exactly be reversed. So, positive charges which are entering the cell at one point would eventually leave the cell at a point somewhere distal or proximal to the point of entry. So, now because of this kind of transmembrane ionic activities, what we have is, if we observe the extracellular space, there is one point at which charge, or in this case ions have left the extracellular space and entered the cell, and similarly somewhere proximal or distal there is a point where the same charges re-enter the extracellular fluid. So, at the point of the entry we have what is called a current sink, and the point entry to the cell, and the point of the exit from the cell back into the ECF we have something called a current source. So, if we see within the extracellular fluid, we have a current sink in one place and we have a current source at another place. So, this configuration, a source sink configuration, is what is called a dipole. So, if we were to record electrical activity, now electrical activity can be recorded from an intracellular electrode. So, what we get is postsynaptic potentials, whereas electrical activity can also be recorded through the placage of electrodes in the extracellular medium. So, as you can see, wherever there is a current sink, we can expect a negative deflection of activity, and wherever there is a current source, we expect there to be a positive deflection in the extracellular electrodes. So, these kind of recordings in extracellular electrodes distinct, which are present at a distinct site away from the cell where these transmembrane currents are taking place, are called field potentials, because the potentials produced in these electrodes is due to the electric field created by the source sink configuration, and the source sink configuration is what is called a source dipole, and eventually all field potentials, be them local field potentials in the vicinity of the cell, or there could be near field potentials at a slightly distant site, or there could be far field potentials at a even further away site. All field potentials are eventually produced due to transmembrane ionic currents, which eventually lead to the production of source dipoles, and these field potentials are explained due to the electric fields produced as a consequence of the source dipoles. right? Now if we see the cerebral cortex, the cerebral cortex can be divided into the neocortex and the paleocortex. So human beings being evolved beings, they around 80% to 90% of the brain is what is called the neocortex, which is the developed part of the brain. So the cerebral neocortex is said to have 6 different layers. From starting from outwards to inwards, there is a molecular layer, there is the outer granule cell layer, there is the outer pyramidal layer, there is the inner granular and the inner pyramidal layer, and then there is the multiform or the pleomorphic layer. So one of the characteristic neurons seen in the cerebral cortex is the pyramidal neuron. So the pyramidal neuron cell body is shaped like a pyramid, and it has an apical dendrite onto which there are multiple synaptic connections. So the apical dendrite receives thalamocortical connections and also corticocortical connections. Now as you can see in layer 4 and layer 2, layer 3 and layer 5, which contain the pyramidal neurons, each of these apical dendrites of the pyramidal neurons are aligned in parallel with each other. So if eventually source dipoles which are formed in the pyramidal neurons, all source dipoles would eventually have a dipole moment, and the vector of this dipole moments would be aligned in the same direction because of the parallel, or what we call the palisading arrangement of the apical dendrites of the pyramidal neurons. So whenever multiple vectors are aligned in the same direction, they summate together. So for example, if we consider the granule cell, the dendrites are oriented in a random manner. So electric fields produced by source dipoles in such dendrites would tend to cancel out, whereas electric fields produced as a consequence of source dipoles in the pyramidal layer of the cerebral cortex would tend to summate and thereby lead to production of stronger electric fields. And another way of improving the dipole moment would be synchronous firing. So more synchronous the firing and more aligned the source dipoles, greater the dipole moment produced, and consequently greater the electric field produced, and then also greater the deflection in the EEG seen. So as a rule of thumb, to produce a noticeable deflection in EEG, we expect around 6 square centimeters of the cerebral cortex to be synchronously active, thereby producing a strong enough near field potential to be recorded at the level of the scalp. Right. Now the physical process through which an electric field conducts through extracellular fluid is something called volume conduction. So volume conduction is a process which allows the EEG to be recorded at the scalp at a distant site from its neural generators. So any neural generator is an dipole leads to an electromagnetic field production. So electric fields produced as a consequence of current sources at the level of the neurons can be detected through EEG, whereas magnetic fields produced as a consequence of these neural generators can be measured through a technique called magnetoencephalography. Now one of the key properties of the volume conduction process is the volume conduction process is affected by the frequency of the electric fields or magnetic fields being produced. So low frequency fields propagate better as opposed to high frequency potentials. So thereby as the distance from the neural source increases, high frequency oscillations tend to attenuate, whereas low frequency oscillations attenuate lesser. So this is what we call the low pass nature of volume conduction. So if we see the electrical potentials at the level of the neuronal cells, they can be synaptic potentials which are slower in frequency based on the synaptic activity, and then there is the action potential, which is the firing of these neurons. So action potentials are of a higher frequency. Now action potentials being of higher frequency are attenuated by the volume conduction process. So eventually what is reflected in the scalp EEG is actually the lower frequency post synaptic potentials, and in this case these postsynaptic potentials are observed in the pyramidal neurons pyramidal neurons, which are the dominant contributors to EEG, and this dominant contribution is due to the palisading nature of their apical dendrites, which allows the summation of the electrical activity produced by them. So now that we understand the neural basis of the EEG, so we understand that cellular neural generators, neural sources which are distributed at different locations in the cerebral cortex, would eventually lead to the production of field potentials. Now we need to understand how they reflect on the scalp. So the reflection of the EEG on the scalp and the correlation with the source dipole would depend on two things. One thing would depend on the location of the dipole in the cortical space. So, dipoles which are closer to the scalp would have a more dominant effect, and then the other effect would be the orientation of the dipole. So, dipoles which are oriented in a parallel direction to the neocortical layers would lead to predominant positivity or negativity at the apex, whereas dipoles which are present perpendicularly to the neocortical cortex would lead to a scenario where there is a left right distribution of polarity. So, based on this we can have something called a scalp topography. So, the ultimate scalp potential developed depends on the summated activity of all the dipoles present, and this scalp potential will have a certain topography with positives and negatives distributed in a specific manner across the scalp. So, whenever we are trying to record a whole scalp EEG, one of the objectives is to sample, which is to basically record the scalp potential at as many different places as possible, so that we get a clear idea of what is the distribution of EEG at different locations of the scalp. So, EEG recording, there are multiple conventions involved in recording EEG. So, we need to understand that there is inter lab and inter researcher variation in the protocols of EEG used. So, to develop a standardized system for placement of electrodes for the purpose of recording the EEG potentials, there is this system called the 10-20 system of electrode placement. So, the 10-20 system of electrode placement was developed to clearly define specific locations on the scalp in which electrodes can be placed. And what we want to do in the 10-20 system of electrodes is obtain a uniform sampling by distributing electrodes at different places. So, one of the problems with EEG is there are many challenges involved in how many electrodes to be placed. Right, once we place electrodes, how are these electrodes connected together to derive electrode pairs in which we can measure the potential difference between them two, and then how many combinations of electrode pairs we want to do. So, right now the clinical guidelines is what is called the 19 channel 21 electrode EEG. So, in this what we do is we place 21 electrodes. So, if we see the 21 electrodes, they are distributed more or less uniformly across the scalp. There are certain electrodes present in the midline. So, electrodes like FZ, CZ and PZ are basically what we call frontal midline, central midline and parietal midline. Now, towards the left we have a bunch of odd number electrodes. So, for example, FP1 is frontoparietal 1, F3 and F7. These are electrodes present on the left frontal. Similarly, the right counterparts would be frontoparietal 2, F4 and F8. Now, similarly on the coronal plane we have C3, T3, C4 and T4, which are basically central and temporal. And then we also have some parietal electrodes and occipital electrodes placed on the parietal and occipital parts of the scalp. And then finally there are two electrodes placed on the ear lobule, A1 on the left ear lobule and A2 on the right ear lobule. So, whenever any EEG electrode is placed, so older generation of EEG electrodes were what we call disc electrodes. So, in this case there would be a gel which is usually silver chloride and the electrodes would be silver. So, the electrode interface would be a silver chloride interface, and these electrodes would have to be placed on the surface of the scalp. Now, initially there was in the older generation of EEG electrodes there was this necessity for scalp preparation in which the hair would have to be shaved, and then the surface of this small patch of hair would have to be shaved exposing the scalp, and then a small EEG electrode, a small area of the scalp would be abraded using a local abrasive. So, this is done to decrease the impedance for the recording of electric potentials at the local site, and each of these electrodes would be placed manually. But now in the modern generation of EEG electrodes come as a net. So, these nets have an elastomeric elastic structure in which, so that the net can expand or constrict accordingly to fit the scalp and the head of the person is being placed on, and these nets are designed in such a way that the inter electrode distances are all maintained, so that there is no need to manually take measurements and place each electrode individually. So now if you understand the 1020 system, the 1020 system is called the 1020 system because the inter electrode distance is usually a percentage, either 10% or 20% of a scalp distance. So if we consider the midline group of electrodes, in the midline group of electrodes we have Fz, Cz and Pz. So Cz is the first electrode placed. So Cz is placed at the midpoint of the midpoint in the sagittal line. So what we do is we measure a distance called the nasion to inion distance. So these are specific bony landmarks. The inion corresponds to the external occipital protuberance and the nasion corresponds to the nasal bone. So what we do is we measure the distance between these two in the antero-posterior direction, and the exact midpoint of this is marked as Cz, and Cz, as you can see, is also the midpoint of a line called the interauricular line, in which a line is drawn from the two interauricular points in the coronal plane, and Cz represents the intersection of the interauricular line and the anteroposterior nasion inion line. And now whenever we place electrodes in a specific line, so for example, if you have to place electrodes in the anteroposterior nasion inion line, Fz and Pz are placed exactly 20% of the total nasion inion anteroposterior distance. So Fz would be 20% of the distance. So for example, if the nasion inion distance was 40 centimeters, 20% of that would be 8. So if Cz was here, Fz would be exactly 8 centimeters ahead of it, and similarly Pz would be 8 centimeters behind it. Now similarly, if you have to place electrodes on the interauricular line of electrodes, so we measure the interauricular distance, and C3 and C4 would be exactly 20% of that distance on either side of Cz, and T3 and T4 would be a further 20% away. So once we have placed these electrodes, we place the outer ring of electrodes. So for the outer ring of electrodes, we measure the head circumference. We measure the head circumference at a point passing through FP1 and OZ, and what we do is we place each of these electrodes at a distance of 20% away from each other. So 8 electrodes are placed in the outer ring of electrodes. So T3 and T4 are already priorly placed in the interauricular line. And then finally we place the central group of electrodes at exactly midpoint between F7 and Fz, Fz and F8, Pz and T5 and Pz and T6. So once these 19 electrodes are placed corresponding to the 1020 system, what we do is we place 2 auricular electrodes. So placing electrodes is just the first part of recording EEG. Now what we must understand is EEG as a scalp potential represents the potential difference between 2 scalp electrodes. Now question is, what 2 electrodes would we consider to be the difference of? So basically any EEG channel represents an electrode pair between which the scalp potential difference is being measured, and a combination of electrode pairs represents something called an EEG montage, which is basically a combination of channels. So that's what we mean by multiple channel EEG. So there's a 19 channel EEG, 32 channel EEG, 64 channel EEG, 128 channel EEG. Now question is, how are these channels constructed? Now we can construct these channels in something called a bipolar montage, in which we can sequentially measure the difference between electrodes. So what we can do is we can measure the difference between FP1 and F3, then C3 and F3, P3 and C3, O1 and P3, and do something similar on the opposite side also. In a sequentially we can keep measuring the potential difference between combination of electrodes in the vertical line, which is called a vertical bipolar montage. We can measure the series of potential differences between the horizontal line, which is called the horizontal bipolar montage. Then there are some other montages called the banana montage. So the key idea being, a bipolar montage measures the potential difference between 2 locations on the scalp. Now there are some other forms of montage called referential montages. So what we do is we define one electrode as reference. So one of the common references used in EEG, some of the common references used in EEG are the vertex reference. Then there is the binaural reference. So there is something called the linked binaural reference, in which A1 and A2, the 2 ear lobule electrodes, are linked electrically together through a connector, and the common point is considered to be a reference. And then there is a mastoid reference. So vertex, mastoid and binaural reference. These are the common references. Now once a referential electrode is defined, you can measure the potential difference between multiple electrodes in the scalp and the referential electrode. So, you can construct a 19 channel for example, the 19 channel 2020 system would be use auditory A1 A2, which is basically the linked binaural reference, and we can measure we can define one electrode pair as CZ A1 A2, and similarly we can define 19 electrode pairs with one pair of the one of the electrodes in the pair being an active electrode of the scalp and the other electrode in the electrode pair being a reference. So, by that way we can construct different montages. So, the idea behind montage operations is once you define a larger montage, you can also define sub montage. You can also reconstruct bipolar montages from the primary referential montage. So, usually clinical EEG involves recording of a primary referential montage and thereby reconstructing any sub montages if necessary. So, once we construct montage, once we define the montage we want to present, then we have to go get to the technical settings of recording the EEG. So, once we define a montage, so a montage is basically defined based on the combination of electrodes or the electrode net, we need additional things. So, EEG as a biopotential is very low amplitude, it is around 0.1 to 100 microvolts, as opposed to something like ECG and EMG, which would be around 1000 times higher in magnitude. 10 to it's around 100 to 1000 times higher in magnitude, like a 1 millivolt range. So, thereby we need a very specified amplifier called a in this case this would be something called a differential amplifier, which would specifically amplify what we call the amplitude range and the frequency range of the EEG. So, EEG, if we need to understand the signal we are recording, EEG is usually in a frequency range of around 1 to 100 microvolts, and it is usually in a frequency range of 0.1 to 100 hertz. So, these are the technical settings of the amplifier we use, and nowadays all modern EEGs are what we call digital systems. The analog system, the analog EEG data recorded by the amplifier is digitized in a device called an analog to digital converter, and then the digitized EEG data is basically what is plotted for display on the live EEG display screen, and can also be stored in a digital format for subsequent analysis and interpretation. Right. So, for example, this is a multi-channel EEG display used in one of our laboratories in our institute, and as you can see there are multiple channels represented here, and you can see a few EEG artifacts like eye blink artifacts and ECG superposed on the data. So, whenever you record EEG, these artifacts must be tried to be minimized as much as possible, and thereby improving the quality of the data we get. Right. Now, coming down to how EEG actually looks like. So, EEG information is primarily determined from its spectral content. So, EEG has what we call classically defined frequency bands named in Greek alphabets. There is delta waves, theta waves, alpha waves, beta waves and gamma waves. Each of these waves have been associated with a specific function. So, the alpha rhythm was the most commonly defined, most commonly and first observed rhythm. It is predominantly seen in the posterior occipital region in the relaxed stage. So, alpha rhythm was the first EEG wave described by Dr. Hans Berger, and then subsequently other EEG waves were described. So, delta waves are what we call slow wave EEG, and delta waves are commonly seen in the deeper stages of sleep, and theta waves are predominantly seen in the hippocampus in animals and in the frontal midline cortices in humans, and beta and gamma waves are involved in the binding of various cortical processes and usually seen in activity of the brain. Right. So, now if we see, now that we have recorded EEG, so an EEG can be recorded in any montage as per requirement. Now, how do we go about interpreting it? So, EEG interpretation is usually done in two ways. So, one interpretation is based on an observer dependent interpretation, in which the observer observes the live EEG or a pre-recorded EEG and makes a clinical judgment based on this. So, if we see the three most common uses of EEG currently clinically, it is used in the diagnosis of epilepsy, it is used as a component of polysomnography, and it is used in the certification of brain death. So, if you see epilepsy, so epilepsy represents an abnormal firing pattern of the cortex in which multiple areas of the cortex fire in a synchronized way. So, EEG by its nature is a random signal due to the complexity and diversity of the generators involved, But epilepsy is an abnormal neurological disorder in which this abnormal synchronization of the cortex, so that multiple parts of the cortex can fire together, and then this is manifested in the form of seizures and loss of consciousness and other symptoms. So what we see in epilepsy is, as the cortex is firing in a synchronized way, and because this synchrony among the neural generators, there is an increase in amplitude, and the entire EEG across the scalp represents a synchronized firing pattern. There are specific artifacts associated with EEG. Now in polysomnography, somnos means sleep. So polysomnography involves multiple tools to evaluate sleep. So one of the tools used is EEG. So in polysomnography, EEG, EMG from the chin muscles, electromyograph, and EOG, electrooculogram, are recorded along with respiratory activity. So the idea is to study the quality of sleep and the staging of sleep. So during the staging of sleep, there are multiple parameters involved. So for example, in stage 1 of sleep, there is an alpha rhythm present. In stage 2 of sleep, there are some specific EEG artifacts called K complexes and sleep spindles present. In stage 3 and stage 4, what we call slow wave sleep, there is a presence of slow wave, delta waves are present in the EEG record, and there is also something called REM sleep, something called rapid eye movement sleep, and in REM sleep we see high frequency EEG with the presence of atonia in the muscles and also ocular movements. And brain death is confirmed by the presence of an isoelectric, which is basically a flat EEG line. Now if you see the bispectral index assesses the depth of anesthesia, and thereby we can calibrate the dosage of the anesthetic drugs or the inhalational medicine to maintain the plane of anesthesia in an ideal plane for surgical procedure. And then finally there is a procedure called neuromonitoring. So neuromonitoring, or what we call intraoperative neuromonitoring, is a technique in which during a live surgical procedure, neuromonitoring is done for the purpose of evaluation of the patency and structure and function of crucial neural structures. So one of the things we do in EEG is something called the burst suppression and somatosensory evoked potentials. So these involve processed EEG data, and specific parameters and interpretations are made on this SSEPs and burst suppression to assess the vitality and patency of crucial neural structures. So this is a picture of an absence seizure which is showing a burst of synchronized activity. As you can see, epileptic activity is transient and it's clearly associated with an onset point and an offset point, and diagnosis of epilepsy involves trying to obtain a seizure record of the EEG, so to speak. Right, now coming down to some of the more research uses of EEG, which is something which we do in research labs. So one of the earliest forms of EEG research uses was something called evoked potentials or event related potentials. So what we want to do in event related potentials is study the cortical processes involved in various tasks, cortical processes like sensory processing, motor planning, and higher cognitive functions like attention. So what we do is we do a specific stimulus response task or some kind of task along with the EEG, and then there is a procedure called averaging, in which the EEG time windows which are time locked to a specific event of interest. So there could be the presentation of a sensory stimulus, there could be a specific motor response instituted, and what we do is we can average time windows which are either time locked ahead or behind the point of interest, and once we average enough trials we see certain components emerging and the noise being averaged out, and these components help us to quantify various functions. So some of the common evoked potentials, which are basically sensory evoked potentials which are used, are somatosensory evoked potential, then there is the visual evoked potential in response to a visual stimulus, and then the brainstem auditory evoked response or brainstem evoked response audiometry, which is basically evoked in response to an auditory stimulus. So this helps us to understand the cortical structures and subcortical structures involved in the various sensory processing tasks. Then there is something called motor related cortical potentials, in which we can study motor planning. There is somatosensory evoked potentials which are studied in the somatosensory cortical processing. And then there are also some cognitive related evoked potentials like mismatch negativity and P300. So P300 is a common evoked potential used to study global brain dysfunction and attentive processes. And then coming to functional neuroimaging. So now EEG, as we can see, involved mostly subjective interpretation of EEG data and processed EEG waveforms. But now with the onset of computerized digital EEGs, there are multiple techniques in which we can extract quantitative parameters which are objective in nature from EEG. So there are different techniques of functional neuroimaging in which we can study the frequency content of the EEG through frequency transform. We use algorithms like the Fourier transform and the wavelet transform, and we can extract information about the spectral content of EEG. So for example, we can see the exact distribution of alpha power. Is the alpha wave dominant predominantly in the anterior part of the cortex or the posterior part of the cortex? Then with the other techniques like source imaging. So source imaging involves reconstruction of cortical activation patterns from EEG, something similar to an fMRI. So in an fMRI we can see different parts of the cortex light up, so to speak, because of the MRI processing in relation to various activities. So in EEG also there are certain algorithms called source localization algorithms. There is an algorithm called S-Loretta in which we can transform EEG data into the activation of various cortical sources, and once we understand the activation of these cortical sources, we can predict the brain areas involved in different cognitive function. Then there are EEG analysis techniques called coherence, in which we can study how coherent are two different sources, how coherent are two different scalp location sensors, and based on this we can study the functional connectivity and interlinked interplay and neural activity of different sources and electrode sites in the EEG record. Okay. So as you can see, electroencephalography is a biopotential which represents the summated activity. So one thing we must keep in mind is EEG has certain limitations. It is primarily used to study the neocortex. It's not that sensitive at studying the subcortical and the deep brain structures, and it is used in the diagnosis of neurological disorders, sleep disorders, and confirmation of brain death, and in anesthesia and in neuromonitoring. It can also be used in functional neuroimaging for research purposes to study the various neurological structures and correlates of cognitive function. And one thing is EEG is easily acquired, the device is very portable, and its flexibility of usage in different settings makes it a very useful tool for the study of neuroscience and neural function. Thank you.